We're gonna play a little rock and roll right now. Just let me hear some of that rock and roll. Rock and roll, rock and roll, man. Rock and roll music. Rock and roll, rock and roll, rock and roll. Rock, 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 roll. Rock and roll, rock and roll, rock and roll.
All right, welcome to the It's Only Rock and Roll podcast, which is now available in both regular and gluten-free. Yes, I'm Don 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗃, and later on in the show, we're going to talk to a guitarist who's been called the Zelig of rock and roll, playing on thousands of sessions with everyone from Art Garfunkel to the Sex Pistols, direct via satellite from the UK, Chris Spedding. To be honest, it'll be easier and less time-consuming to list the people my guest hasn't played guitar for over his 5-decade career in the music business. He's worked on sessions for artists such as Jack Bruce, Bryan Ferry, Robert Gordon, Harry Nilsson, Elton John, the Sex Pistols, the Pretenders, Paul McCartney, and oh yeah, by the way, also has a successful solo career. Please welcome to the It's Only Rock and Roll podcast, guitar legend, Chris Spedding. Hello, Chris.
Hi there. Hi, how you doing?
Very well. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure.
You have got to be the most prolific guitar player, not just in the UK, but in rock and roll, period. Do you ever get tired of hearing that?
Well, I hear that quite a bit. It's not necessarily that true. I was very active in the studios in London in the 70s. So, yeah, I did a lot of stuff back then. Not as much work around now, but I still keep busy.
Well, before we get into all that, you mentioned not having work now. Obviously, 2020 has been a washout for live music. And for a person that's so used to being on stage all the time, how are you getting through this period?
Actually, I'm really enjoying it.
Really? That's good.
Well, you know, I've been very busy having to sort of show up on time and do my thing. So not having to do that for a while, it's actually I'm starting to feel guilty about not feeling guilty about being so lazy. I like lazing around at home.
Sure.
Now thinking, well, you know, this can't go on forever. So I hope all this craziness comes to an end soon. Maybe next year we'll be back. Some semblance of doing some live shows. I don't know.
And where do you call home now?
I'm in West Sussex, which is on the south coast of the UK.
Okay. Now, you got to forgive me if some of these questions are out of order. You've just had such a vast and colossal career. I'm kind of jumping all over the place. To start with, tell me the first time and what you remember hearing for the first time American rock and roll.
Well, we had this thing in the 50s called skiffle, which you might have heard of if you're...
Like Lonnie Donegan.
Yeah, you know, the Beatles were very into it. They had a skiffle group called the Quarrymen and everything. So I'm of that generation. So it wasn't American, but what Lonnie Donegan was doing, he was taking Americana music, as we call it now, you know, like Lead Belly, Woody Guthrie, all that stuff, Carter Family, and making his own music out of it called skiffle. So at one remove, I got into American music via Lonnie Donegan, and then, of course, later got into Elvis. I remember I had a friend at school. I would have been about 12 or 13 at the time. I had everything that Lonnie Donegan had put out, and he was saying, "No, Lonnie's not cool. You've got to get into this guy Elvis," you know. And I know to present generation, Elvis is probably not that cool, but I tell you, back in 1957, he was cool.
Oh, he's still cool. He's very cool.
Well, so yeah, but every time you mention Elvis, the sort of image comes in people's minds of the rhinestone white jumpsuit. That's not the Elvis that we all like refer to in our minds. My generation,
right?
It's the sort of dangerous-looking guy that appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. You know?
Pre-army Elvis.
Yeah. That was the Elvis we all like were totally besotted by.
Sure.
So yeah. Let's get that one out of the way. So all that came with it, you know, Gene Vincent, Eddie Cochran, Rick Nelson, all those great guitar players like Scotty Moore and James Burton, we were all into that. Mm-hmm. We didn't know their names then. Of course, you know, an Elvis Presley record would say Elvis Presley with the Jordanaires.
Right.
And we all thought, oh, the Jordanaires was his backing group, not thinking that it was just the vocal group, not the musicians.
Right.
The instrumental.
Right.
So we find all this out like much later on, about 10 years on, we find out the details of all that, you know.
Then I heard when you were getting guitar lessons, there was a teacher that was kind of instrumental in getting you into less rock and roll and more into a jazz thing.
Well, yeah, my parents, God bless them, they sort of, because I started on the violin and they were really disappointed being classically oriented musicians, that I was, forsaking the violin. So they said, you've got to go to a proper teacher if you're going to play this horrible guitar, electric guitar. I remember when I first asked for an amplifier to go with my guitar, they said, well, 𝗙𝗂𝗹𝗶𝗁 doesn't need an amplifier. So this was the sort of atmosphere I had to sort of put up with. And so they sent me to a local guy. And of course, in the late 50s, sort of guy that would teach you this sort of guitar would be a jazz guy, a guy with a jazz background. So sort of influenced by him, I became a bit of a snob and I would only listen to Charlie Christian and Barney Kessel and Wes Montgomery, people like that. So I went through a period, how teenagers can get. They can get really snobby about something when they realize that, there's all this other world of guitar playing out there. And these guys, like my model would have been like the Shadows, which is the equivalent to your Ventures over there. Right. So, then I sort of thought, that guy can't play, I can't play as well as Barney Kessel, and incredible snobbishness about it. And so, in a way, that made me more eclectic and more versatile in my playing, and probably influenced my playing a lot, much more than if I'd just stayed with the rock. Sure. But but my first thing was the rock, Elvis and the skiffle and everything. Then I diverted to the sort of jazz thing. Towards the end of the 60s, I realized that jazz wasn't really at the cutting edge of where things were going, because I was starting to realize that when I started, rock and roll was considered really not proper music. It was considered how a lot of the older generation look at rap today. Oh, that's not music, or disco or something. Right. But when the Beatles started becoming accepted by everybody loved the Beatles in the mid 60s. It changed. The Beatles were doing stuff that was actually quite respectable and quite forward looking, and I came quite interested in them. Yeah. And so the jazz thing took a back seat. And then when Miles Davis started adding electronic stuff, Miles Davis was no longer leading the way in jazz. He was trying to be like Sly Stone. So rock was the way to go. And I already had the rock roots with my Elvis days. There was a period there in the early 70s where I was playing with a lot of the new jazz fusion people in England, because I think they gravitated to me because I had the jazz. There were the references, like if they gave me a chord sequence and a chart and say, can you do this, and play a couple of choruses of that, and then we'll play this chord, and I could relate to that because of my jazz days, whereas many rock guys would have thought, what are you talking about? Right. So I think I played with a lot of guys around 1970, 71.
Well, what came first, the session work or being with the Battered Ornaments?
Battered Ornaments, I think.
Peter Brown was in that band?
Peter Brown, lyricist for Jack Bruce, and that's how I got to meet Jack Bruce. And so I think after I got on that Songs for a Tailor record, that put my name around a little bit as a session guy. So I think it started from there. I have to thank Jack for that. And I started getting calls from the fixers, as we call them, the contractors for sessions.
You were on the track Never Tell Your Mother She's Out of Tune.
That's right.
And George Harrison was on that too. Were you in the same session with him, or did he do that separately?
I wasn't on that. No, I wasn't on that. I heard about that later, about how George got his sound on the Telecaster with all the treble turned off. And the lyric that Peter Brown had written was actually as a result of a story that I'd told him about my own mother, who sang in a Bach choir, and I went to hear her play with a local orchestra in a church. They used to do things like Bach and Handel, the Passion and all that stuff. And I made the remark to my mother that the string orchestra was a little out of tune. I was a bit sort of full of myself. Yeah, I made this remark to my mother, and she was most upset. I was full of my chops as I just started being very busy and earning a lot of money, and I thought, there's been a bit pompous saying, you shouldn't really make comments about other people's music, especially if it's your mother. So that's the origin of that title.
Interesting. I know you guys, along with King Crimson, were one of the opening bands for the Stones at Hyde Park.
Yeah, we got on as the band before the Stones, at the park.
Okay.
That was really because the people that promoted the Stones in the park were our managers, Black Hill Enterprises. So that's why we got the plum spot.
And didn't they use your truck?
Yes, we had appropriately for a band called the Battered Ornaments, we had a British Army Field ambulance as our gig van. And it had no windows, of course, being an ambulance. So I remember I had a really bad attack of hay fever, and I was keeping out of the sun in the truck, and I got asked unceremoniously to leave because they wanted to borrow the truck to get the Stones into the park. So I was not too pleased about that, but our truck was used by the Stones. It was one of those situations where the limo came in, which was which was what do you call it?
Like a decoy.
A decoy.
Yeah,
that's the word I was looking for. Right. So anyway, when they arrived and went on stage, I just went back in the truck. That's why I didn't see the show.
You played on the original concept LP for the Jesus Christ Superstar production.
Yeah, we were asked to do link passages because I was in a fusion band called 𝗚𝗎𝗋𝗧𝗘, and on our album we sort of recorded link passages to our tunes, so that it sounded like the whole LP side was segue was actually one performance.
Okay.
And I think Andrew Lloyd Webber liked that idea and wanted us to do that for Jesus Christ Superstar album. So he hired our band. And we did some of that, and I don't think a lot of it was used. I think
really?
one of our little link passages might have been used. So yeah, I'm actually on the album, but to be honest, I never bought the album, so I don't know what I can't be buying all the albums I played on.
Oh my God, to do it. No, nobody could. You'd go broke.
I'd never have time to work.
Exactly right. And you also worked on 2 albums for Harry Nilsson, Schmielsen, and Son of Schmielsen.
Yes.
Was it the full band? Because I know Peter Frampton was on that.
Yes, I remember Peter was there, and Ringo was on it, and Ann Klaus Foreman, Herbie Flowers,
right? Yeah,
and Barry Morgan, the other drummer, and
Nicky Hopkins.
Nicky Hopkins, yeah. I'm losing my names. Nicky Hopkins.
And Richard Perry, how was he to work for? Was he a taskmaster? Or?
He was a bit, yeah. I remember we would be booked a couple of consecutive days. And we'd do about, the takes would be getting into that 70 take 70, take 71, take 70 of some track. Mm. We'd come back the next morning, and there'd be the ashtray would be piled high with cigarette butts. They'd obviously been there all night listening to these tracks. And I remember overhearing Richard Perry say, "Yeah, take number 2 is the best." Which is what nearly always used to happen in those days when we used to do take after take after take. They got worse and worse and worse. You get more and more into it.
Right.
And when you eventually had the subjectiveness to listen to everything, you realize that the earlier takes were the ones.
How was session musicians paid then? I mean, was it by the hour? Was it for the session? What was the nuts and bolts of that?
Got a session was 3 hours.
Okay.
We didn't get paid that much in the 70s. American session rate was a lot more. Mm. And sometimes, I mean, when I got really established, I used to work for double scale.
Okay.
But that was not common in Britain. And, you didn't get that much. It wasn't a great. If you're working all the time, you earned a good amount of money.
Right.
But you had to keep working to keep that lifestyle up.
Sure. Just one more of those. Do you remember the session questions? Elton John, Madman Across the Water.
Yes, I remember that session. It took place in the same studio as the Nilsson sessions in Trident in Soho, and I remember it was a full orchestra with Paul Buckmaster conducting, and there were a full string section, which was quite amazing in Trident, because Trident was a kind of very small studio with the control room tucked in the roof. You have to walk upstairs to get into and underneath where the playback room was where the drum booth was. And it's amazing that we got all those musicians in there. I guess it's a bit like what happened in Hitsville in Detroit in the Motown sessions.
Yep. Small rooms. When
you hear some of those fully orchestrated, with horns and strings and some of those, and then you look at that room, how did they ever get in there? Similar thing, but it was a memorable session. I remember it. I think Elton was there. I'm losing the name of the producer.
Gus Dudgeon?
Gus Dudgeon was there, yeah. And it was, I think it was Barry Morgan and 𝗷𝗶𝗶𝗵𝘁 on bass and drum. I was on guitar. And it was just, it wasn't like lots of overdubs later. It was done live. The Madman Across the Water track.
Herbie was with T-Rex for a bit. Did you ever run into Mark Bolan much?
I ran into him in the studios a couple of times in one of the clubs one night. He seemed a nice chap just before he died, actually. Herbie was on most of those records. They overdubbed him afterwards because Tony Visconti, the producer, used to use him on T-Rex and on David Bowie's.
Yep.
He was a bass player on everything from Space Oddity record onwards.
Yep.
So Tony Visconti always used to use Herbie, much to the chagrin of the bass player that Mark had on the Top of the Pops all the time.
Was it Steve?
Steve Curry, yeah. Who also played with me at one point.
Oh, yeah?
After Mark had gone, yeah.
Now, speaking of bass players, you joined the Sharks with Free's bass player, Andy Fraser.
That's right.
Now, because you can definitely see a period, especially in England, where the hippie 60s thing was getting out of fashion and morphing more into a pre-punk 50s rocker kind of comeback. I don't know if I'm
There was a genre called the pub rock, which was pre-punk garage bands and stuff. And we missed the glam rock thing, which was also happening with T-Rex and Roxy Music.
Right.
Although Sharks opened for Roxy Music on their second tour. Well, we were into the R&B, the blue-eyed soul type thing, the same thing that Free was into. And, well, it wasn't a commercial success. We made a couple of nice records. Andy left the band after we recorded the first record. I got to hook up with him a little later, the year before he died, which was nice.
Yeah.
I always rated him as a brilliant musician, good writer, and great bass player. I've been lucky with my bass players, Jack Bruce, Andy Fraser, 𝗷𝗶𝗶𝗵𝘁.
Yeah, the best.
So,
yeah. And I understand you recustomized your Pontiac Le Mans.
Oh, yeah. We had some art guy do it, painted waves on the side, put teeth on the front and a fin on the top. Yeah, that didn't last long. I smashed that up after a couple of months.
Oh, did you? That's cool. And then right around that time, you had your biggest solo hit with Motorbiking. It's a roots rock, but it's also a prototype for the punk rock vibe.
It was, yeah. The biker look with the straight leg jeans and the leather jacket was not the current rock star attire in 1975. I sort of anticipated the punk thing by a good 18 months to 2 years, which is probably quite why they kind of gravitated to me, and I got to produce their first demos, the Sex Pistols. Because, the first thing was that if you wanted to get that look, 50s look, the greaser look, the Vivienne Westwood shop that she had with Malcolm McLaren was the place to get new clothes like that. Mm-hmm. So they knew me as a sort of established musician, and I got to eventually hear the band.
Didn't 𝗀cie HiH take you over to see them?
She did, yeah. I knew 𝗀cie from, I'd met her in 1974 with a tour I did with John Cale. So it was well before she got the Pretenders together. And she knew Malcolm. She knew a lot of stuff. She was really on the scene for a long time before she got the Pretenders together. And she got me down to the 100 Club to see them, yeah.
What'd you think?
Oh, I liked them.
Yeah.
I was a bit bemused by the fact that there were less people at the end of the show than there were at the beginning. Tend to sort of frighten people off. Yeah. But when I was hearing the disdain which the music industry held them, like people wouldn't come down to their gigs and they would never get signed up. I said, look, I can help you get signed up, because what you need to do is to do a 3-song demo. You're never going to get any record executives down to your shows. They'd be frightened. Yeah. Being beaten up.
And they were getting bad press before people even saw them.
They were, yeah.
So what were the 3 songs?
Well, at the time, I went to a rehearsal. I said, look, I'm going to choose 3 songs. Play me everything you got. And so I went to their rehearsal in Denmark Street, their rehearsal place they had. And I chose Problems, Pretty Vacant, and No Feelings. Mm-hmm. They hadn't written God Save the Queen at that point, but those were their best 3 songs. So I recorded those, and it got them their deal with EMI. And I sent it to Chris Thomas, and he got them their producer. Which I knew Chris Thomas because he was producing me.
Yep.
They loved the idea of Chris Thomas because they were all like closet Roxy Music fans. Although their publicity would never have said that until a lot later.
And of course, you have a great relationship with Bryan Ferry.
Yeah, at that time I'd done Let's Stick Together with Bryan. Yeah.
Actually, I want to give you this quote. Someone said, Chris Spedding was one of the few guys who was cool to like before punk and after punk.
Oh, well, that's nice to hear. I don't think the punkers really warmed to me because I was in my 30s by the time punk happened, you know.
Way over the hill.
I was a boring old fart to them. So, I mean, I realized that. And also I couldn't really, the sort of nihilistic attitude and that, and the anger. You know, I got nothing to be angry about in 1976. I'd already had a hit record of a career.
There you go. You know? Yeah, so, right.
So I couldn't really endorse the young sort of 20-year-old angst. So I just let them go their own way and went my own way.
Sure.
And it was just fascinating to be involved in something on the ground floor of a new movement. So I was happy to be involved, you know.
And I've seen it written, and you have a lot of integrity because you've always set the story straight. You did not turn the Stones down to replace Mick Taylor. Tell it how it really happened.
I wasn't offered the gig, but I was rung up by Mick Jagger. I think Mick Taylor had left in sort of January or something, 74. And I always say it's a bit like when the Pope dies. You know, all the music papers had like little vignettes of all these guitar players like Ray Gallagher, Jeff Beck, Clapton. You know,
waiting for the white smoke to appear.
Who could possibly be the new Pope with the Rolling Stones? Yeah,
right.
And I was on that list, and so I was a bit put out that 6 months went by and I never heard from them. Meanwhile, I'd recorded Motorbiking; it hadn't quite hit the charts yet. I had like John Cale with Roy Harper. I had a full date book. So then I get a call from Mick Jagger, and I just say, "Look, mate, that's great. If the Stones are doing the tour of America in August, I've got a full date book. I'm busy. Maybe another time." And Mick said, "Oh yeah, okay, right." And that's the end of that. Maybe I should have kept quiet about it. And then it's a bit embarrassing to have to keep explaining that.
Let me ask you, in hindsight, do you think that would have been the right move for you?
I don't think I ended up getting the gig. They'd have just strung me along. People like Jeff Beck were flying over to Amsterdam and putting themselves in a hotel at their own expense. And then, sorry, no rehearsals today, Jeff. We'll see you tomorrow. You know, if they treated Jeff Beck like that,
wow.
Well, how are they going to treat me? And in the end, it was about a week after this phone call, it was announced that Ron Wood was going to be the guitar player. So I think they'd already decided, and I think reading into it from my side, I think Mick Jagger wanted his guy in the band.
Yep.
So he called me up, wondering if I'd be his guy, and he saw from my reaction that there was no way I was going to be his guy. I was going to be my guy, and so he probably thought, "Oh, okay, we'll go with
Keith's guy." Right.
So maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but maybe there you go.
Now, most of our listeners are in the States, so please explain to us what a Womble is and how you came to be associated with them.
Oh, it was just like another session. Yeah. I knew this guy, Mike Batt. He had a job with this kiddies show where a lot of Muppets, a bit like Muppets, but they were imaginary Wombles, Wimbledon Common. You know, Wimbledon where the tennis is. Yeah. There's a big common there. And the Wombles were, apparently they would go around clearing up the rubbish that people, all the litter that people would leave. They would go around and they'd have a tidy bag and then sort of pick up the litter and put it. And I never saw a show, but he was commissioned to write the signature tune. So he did, and it was a hit. So Mike, being a resourceful guy, he turned it into a little cottage industry there. All the musicians would dress up in these furry outfits. You know, it was that's what it was. It was a bit like you would have something called the Archies, like a cartoon. Right. Well, we had the Wombles, and he was very resourceful in doing. Remember, you're a Womble. You know, a Wombling Merry Christmas, and in the Hall of the Mountain Womble, or stuff like that.
I'm getting the gist. Yeah.
And it was very, very resourceful of him and very clever. And he used big orchestrations. And his voice, Mike Batt's voice, was the voice of the lead Womble, which in his later career was a bit of a curse because he was quite a recognizable voice. And when he tried to do his own songs, proper pop songs,
right,
nobody would play them because it sounded like the Wombles. So he had to get other people like Art Garfunkel, who he wrote Bright Eyes for, which was also on.
Mm-hmm.
And he got artists to sing his songs that he really wrote for himself, but the DJs wouldn't play them because they sounded like Womble songs. So they were great songs, which was such a shame. That's the Wombles.
You relocated to the States in late 70s, 78, around there, and started up with Robert Gordon. You came after Link Wray left him, or was there an overlap with you and Link? Or
no, Link was doing one of my tunes, Wild Wild Women, with Robert, and I got called up by the producer 𝗀𝗙𝗃𝗃. Did I want to sort of do a session with them when they recorded it? And I sort of thought, oh, that's not a bad idea. And I was thinking of moving from London to New York at the time. I got a call back a few days after saying, well, by the way, Chris, Link and Robert are going to split up. Do you want to try out for the job of guitar player? So I thought, oh, this is a great way to get myself into New York, because I'll be coming in and doing a gig. I'll have a gig. So I went for that, and that was the beginning of my association with Robert.
There's a great clip of you with Robert at the Lone Star. I guess it would be 1985, with Stevie Ray Vaughan playing Linda Lou.
Oh, right.
Man, I love that.
Okay.
And your work is just phenomenal with him. And it continues to this day. Again, your relationships are not one-offs. I mean, you stayed loyal to these people and vice versa.
Yeah, on and off with Bryan, on and off with Robert, yeah. Yep.
Well, I hope next year you guys come around here.
Are scheduled, all the shows that were cancelled this summer, the American shows, we're hoping to reschedule them next summer, 2021.
Have you ever counted up how many sessions you actually played on?
No. The guy who does my website's got like a bit of a handle on that. The guy in Japan, 𝗀𝗙𝗃𝗃, who does my website, he's got like a whole discography on the website.
Well, let me ask you, looking back, what's the one that you're proudest of?
Session work or my own albums?
Let's start with session work.
Session work. Well, I suppose the Bryan Ferry stuff is good. Working with Bryan he always gets something different. The stuff I did In Your Mind album in 1977 was good. Mm-hmm. Some of the stuff I did on the Let's Stick Together album.
Okay. And how about your own work?
Well, the Hurt album is the best sounding album. That was the one that Chris Thomas produced.
It's great, yeah.
And the one with the car on the front, the Chris Spedding album. But I've done albums since. Of course, you always try and get them better and better, even though the fans might not think so.
You got to please yourself.
We end up pleasing ourselves in the end. So the last album I did is called Joyland, and it's on a 𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃 label.
That's where Robert's on, yeah.
And I'm on one of his, as you know.
Oh, yeah.
And I got another one on my 50th anniversary in the music biz.
That's great.
Last year or the year before, called Face to Face.
I heard a quote from you. I want to make sure I get it right here. I wrote it down. There's nothing more boring than being respected. It's just not what rock and roll is all about. I mean, I didn't respect Eddie Cochran. I just thought he was far out, and I don't want people to respect me. Get into that a little bit.
Well, that was when I was doing the motorbiking stuff, and that people that buy that sort of record are not like doing it out of respect. They're buying it. They're buying it because I think it's cool. It's exciting, and the young kids will like it. And I really did that record because I wanted to create the same excitement that I felt when I was a teenager, listening to Elvis and Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent.
Sure.
So that's why I sort of manufactured that sound around that, and the look and everything around what excited me when I was a young kid. And I wanted to do the same to the younger generation, which was quite a lot younger than me at that time. I'd have been approaching 30 when I did motorbiking. 31, in fact. I was born in 44, and that was in 75. So, it came off that once. It succeeded that once. That quote is from around that time.
You still feel the same way?
I've modified my views a little bit, because you do when you get to my age.
Sure.
So a little bit of both. But I think the old thing about getting too serious about music is I don't think you should get too serious about it.
Right.
So the respect thing is it's still a bit boring. We want people to be excited, and sort of say, oh, wow, this is great. I feel like dancing, or I feel like, getting up and doing something, or let's hear that again. That's not respect. That's just sheer enjoyment and entertainment. And that's what I'm hoping that I'm doing with my music.
Every guitar player that I know respects you very much. You'll have to live with it.
I'll take that.
And of course, the one and only Chris Spedding, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Spedding.
Yeah, originally done by Johnny Burnett, I think. Lonesome Train on a Lonesome Track. Some live Robert Gordon featuring the great Chris Spedding.
Love it.